She walked out of the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on her back and a settlement check that barely covered her cab fare. Her husband, the Titan of Wall Street, toasted with his mistress as the door clicked shut. They thought Audrey was finished. They thought she was just the trophy wife who aged out. But they forgot one thing: Audrey didn't just decorate the office. She listened. And while they laughed, she was already holding the kill switch to their entire empire. This is the story of how Audrey Hart turned humiliation into $1 billion checkmate that froze the entire financial world. The rain in Tribeca didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Audrey Hart stood on the cobblestones outside the penthouse building at 443 Greenwich Street, the water soaking through her cashmere coat, one of the few things she'd been graciously allowed to keep. Upstairs, the party was already starting. She could see the amber glow of the recessed lighting in the floor-to-ceiling windows. She could almost hear the clinking of baccarat crystal. Preston Anna, the man she had spent 12 years building up from a nervous junior analyst to the CEO of Anna Holloway Capital, was celebrating his freedom. Or as his lawyer had put it during the final mediation, his unshackling. "Audrey, please," Preston had said 3 hours earlier in the sterile conference room, not even looking her in the eye. He was checking his Breitling watch board. "Let's not drag this out. You get the condo in Jersey, the 2018 Rover, and a monthly stipend for 2 years. It's generous. Don't make me crush you." His lawyer, a shark named Beryl Penn, who smelled of expensive scotch and moral decay, had slid the papers across the mahogany table. "The prenup is ironclad, Mrs. Anna. You signed it when Preston had nothing. The fact that the firm is now worth $4 billion is legally irrelevant. You are entitled to what you brought in," which was, if I recall, a student loan debt and a cat. Audrey hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown the water pitcher. That was what the old Audrey would have done, the Audrey who believed in partnership. Instead, she had looked at Preston, really looked at him. She saw the hair plugs he tried to hide, the nervous tick in his jaw that flared up when he was lying, and the way his eyes kept darting to his phone, undoubtedly waiting for a text from Tiffany, the 24-year-old brand consultant who had been consulting on his marriage for the past 6 months. "Okay," Audrey had whispered. Preston blinked. "Okay, I'll sign, but I want one thing." "Money," Beryl Penn sneered. "No, I want the Rolodex." Preston had laughed, a loud barking sound that bounced off the glass walls. "The Rolodex, Audrey, nobody uses a Rolodex anymore. It's 2024. All our contacts are in the cloud. You want the dusty old spinner from the basement, the one my dad used. Sentimental value." Audrey lied smoothly. "I used to play with it when we first started the company in the garage. It reminds me of when we were real." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "Give it to her. If she wants a piece of junk, plastic, instead of an extra 10 grand, let her have it. Sign the papers." She signed. Now, standing in the rain, clutching the handle of her suitcase and a plastic shopping bag containing the vintage cracked Rolodex, Audrey looked up at the window one last time. She saw a silhouette Tiffany slender and holding a champagne flute lean against the glass looking down. Tiffany didn't wave, but the tilt of her head screamed victory. "I won," the posture said. "You lost." Audrey turned to the curb. She didn't call an Uber Black. She couldn't afford the habit anymore. She hailed a yellow cab. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing her wet hair in the rearview mirror. "The Red Hook terminal." Audrey said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I have a storage unit to visit." As the taxi merged into the chaotic traffic of Canal Street, Audrey reached into the plastic bag and touched the cold, dusty plastic of the Rolodex. Preston was right about one thing: nobody used these anymore. The contacts inside names like Bernie or Lehman were dead or irrelevant. But Preston, for all his Ivy League education and killer instinct, had forgotten the one rule Audrey had taught him in the beginning: always check the lining. Inside the hollow base of the Rolodex, taped to the bottom with yellowing Scotch tape, was a micro SD card. It wasn't the contacts that mattered. It was the audio. For 12 years, Audrey hadn't just been the wife who hosted the dinner parties. She was the one Preston vented to after his third scotch. She was the one who sat in the corner of the Home Office, knitting or reading, while Preston took calls on speakerphone because he liked to pace. She knew about the offshore accounts in the Caymans that bypassed the IRS. She knew about the environmental reports for the lithium mine in Nevada, the reports Anna Holloway had buried to ensure the deal went through. And most importantly, she knew about Project Chimera. Project Chimera was the deal of the century. It was a hostile takeover of a massive biotech firm, Biogen X, that Preston was orchestrating. But to make the stock price tank so he could buy it cheap, Preston had been leaking false rumors to the press about Biogen X's clinical trials failing. It was market manipulation, clear as day. Illegal. A felony that would put him away for 20 years. He thought she was stupid. He thought she was just the woman who picked out his ties. Audrey pulled her phone out. She had 4% battery left. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 15 years. "Hello." A gruesome, gravelly voice answered. It was loud background noise of a dive bar filtering through. "Ethan," Audrey said. There was a pause. Audrey Hart. It's Audrey Anna. Well, Hart again, I suppose." "I saw the news. TMZ says you got fleeced. I'm sorry, kid." "Don't be," Audrey said, watching the skyline recede. "I need a favor. Remember that favor you owe me for saving your ass in the .com crash." "I remember," Ethan said. Ethan the Vulture Caldwell. He wasn't a billionaire. He was a forensic accountant who had been blacklisted by every major firm in New York for being too good at finding things people wanted hidden. He lived off the grid, operating out of a houseboat in Jersey. "I'm coming to you," Audrey said. "I have something, and I need to know how to weaponize it." "Weaponize it." Ethan chuckled the sound like a car engine turning over. "Audrey, you were always the nice one. You don't have the stomach for a war." Audrey looked at her reflection in the cab window. The mascara was running, making her look like a phantom. She wiped it away with her thumb, smearing a dark streak across her cheek like war paint. "Preston laughed at me, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping an octave, turning ice cold. "He laughed when I left. He thinks he bought my silence with a rover and a condo in Jersey. And I'm going to buy his company," Audrey said, "with his own money." She hung up just as the phone died. The cab driver glanced back. "You all right, lady? You look a little intense." Audrey smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 6 months. It wasn't a nice smile. "I'm fine," she said, "just planning a comeback." Back in the penthouse, the mood was electric. Preston Anna raised his glass. "To the future," he bellowed. "To the future." The sycophants cheered. Tiffany giggled, draping her arm around his neck. "Oh, Prez, you were so strong today. She looked so pathetic." "She's the past, Tiff," Preston said, kissing her forehead. "She's ancient history. She doesn't have the capital, the connections, or the brains to survive in this city alone. She'll be back in Ohio bagging groceries in a month." He took a sip of his 50-year-old scotch. It tasted like victory. He had no idea that the ancient history he had just discarded was currently sitting in a yellow cab holding the detonator to his entire life. The countdown had already started, and the numbers were falling fast. The houseboat smelled of stale coffee and diesel fuel. It was docked in a forgotten marina in Jersey City, under the shadow of the overarching highway. It was a far cry from the Hamptons estate Audrey had spent her summers in, but right now, it felt like a fortress. Ethan Caldwell sat in front of a bank of monitors that looked like they were salvaged from a NASA yard sale. He was older than Audrey remembered. His hair was entirely white, now tied back in a messy ponytail, and he wore a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. He typed furiously, the blue light of the screens reflecting in his glasses. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. Audrey sat on a milk crate, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug. She had changed out of her wet clothes into a pair of oversized sweatpants Ethan had lent her. She looked small, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. "Well?" she asked, breaking the silence. Ethan spun his chair around. "Audrey, you realize this is nuclear, right? If I decrypt this fully and it gets out, Preston doesn't just lose the company. He goes to federal prison, and half the board goes with him." "I know," Audrey said calmly. "You really want to send the father of your... Well, you guys never had kids, did you?" "No," Audrey said, a pang of old pain hitting her chest. Preston had always said it wasn't the right time. Now she knew he just didn't want the liability. "We didn't." "Okay. So scorched earth. I get it. But here's the problem." Ethan pointed a calloused finger at the screen. "You can't just leak this. If you leak the audio of him admitting to market manipulation on Biogenex, the stock crashes. Anna Holloway tanks. The assets freeze. You get your revenge, sure. But you get $0. The government seizes everything." Audrey set the mug down. "I don't just want him in jail, Ethan. I want what I built. I wrote the business plan for Anna Holloway on a napkin in a diner. I designed the logo. I introduced him to his first angel investor, my uncle, who Preston later screwed over. I want the company. You want to take over a $4 billion hedge fund with..." Ethan checked his pockets. $40 and a faltering Uber rating. "I want to execute a leveraged buyout," Audrey said. Ethan laughed so hard he started coughing. "A hostile takeover. You, Audrey, you need capital. Massive capital. Even if we tank the stock, you need backing to buy the controlling share." "I know someone," Audrey said, "who everyone in New York is scared of Preston. He's the golden boy." "Not everyone," Audrey said. "There's one person who hates Preston more than I do." "Who?" "Jonathan Galt." The name hung in the air like a curse word. Jonathan Galt was the corporate raider of the 80s, a man so ruthless he was effectively exiled from polite society. He had been Preston's mentor until Preston stole a deal out from under him 5 years ago, a betrayal that cost Galt hundreds of millions and his reputation. Galt had retreated to a ranch in Wyoming, disappearing from the public eye. "Galt," Ethan whistled. "He's a recluse. He shoots trespassers. You think he's going to listen to the ex-wife of his enemy? He will," Audrey said, standing up. "Because I'm bringing him Preston's head on a platter. But I need to get to Wyoming, and I need to look like I'm not desperate." "You are desperate. I know, but Galt can't know that." Audrey paced the small cabin. "I need a loan, Ethan. I'm broke, Audrey. I live on a boat. Not money. I need a suit, a really good suit, and a plane ticket." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I have a stash. Emergency fund. It was for... Well, never mind. It's about $5,000. It's all I have." Audrey looked at him. "I'll pay you back 10 times over. Just don't get me killed," Ethan grumbled, reaching under the floorboards. 2 days later, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The air was thin and crisp. Audrey stepped out of the rental car, a modest sedan she had parked a mile down the road so she could walk up the driveway and look like she had been dropped off by a private driver. The The Galt estate was massive, a sprawling timber fortress nestled against the Tetons. Security cameras buzzed as she approached the iron gate. "State your business," a voice crackled from the intercom. "Audrey Hart to see Mr. Galt." "Mr. Galt is not expecting visitors. Tell him I have the Chimera tapes." There was a long silence. The wind howled through the pines. Audrey shivered, tightening her coat. She had spent half of Ethan's money on this vintage Chanel suit from a consignment shop. She needed to look the part of a player, not a victim. The gate buzzed and slowly swung open. Audrey walked the long driveway. When she reached the heavy oak door, it was opened by an older man in a cowboy hat. Not a servant. It was Jonathan Galt himself. He looked weathered, his face like cracked leather, but his eyes were sharp blue steel. He leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. "Preston's wife," Galt said. His voice was like grinding rocks. "Ex-wife," Audrey corrected. "The Chimera tapes," Galt repeated. "That's a fancy name. Sounds like a spy novel." "It's a recording of Preston admitting to the SEC violations regarding the Biogen X short sell. He plans to tank the stock next week, buy it for pennies, and then announce the miracle recovery." Galt's eyes narrowed. "And why bring this to me? Why not the feds?" "Because the feds will just shut him down," Audrey said, stepping closer. "I don't want him shut down. I want him replaced. I want to buy Anna Holloway when the stock dips. I need a backer. You put up the capital, I provide the smoking gun. We split the company 51-49. I keep control." Galt laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "You keep control. You've never run a company in your life, little lady." "I ran Preston," she snapped, "for 12 years. I polished him, I directed him, and I cleaned up his messes. He's the face. I was the brain. And I'm done being the ghost." Galt stared at her for a long moment. He saw something in her eyes. Not fear. Not sadness. Ambition. Cold, hard ambition. "Come inside," Galt said, stepping aside. "I've got whiskey, and you've got a story to tell." Inside the house was a shrine to Galt's past victories. Mounted heads of animals framed covers of Forbes and Fortune. They sat by a roaring fire. "Here's the deal," Galt said, pouring 2 glasses of Pappy Van Winkle. "I've been waiting for a shot at Preston for 5 years. But I don't back losers. If this tape is fake, or if you flinch, I will leave you to the wolves. Preston is vicious. If he finds out you're coming for him, he won't just sue you. He'll destroy you." "He already tried," Audrey said, taking the whiskey. She didn't drink it. She just held it like a weapon. "He missed." "Okay," Galt said. "But we can't just buy him out. He holds 40% of the voting shares. We need to turn the board of directors against him before we make the move. We need a proxy war." "I know the board," Audrey said. "I know their secrets too. Specifically board member Marcus Thorne. Thorne, the choir boy. Thorne has a gambling debt in Macau that Preston covered up using company funds," Audrey revealed. "I have the wire transfer receipts on the drive." Galt smiled, a genuine predatory smile. "Well, damn. Maybe you were the brains." "We launched the attack in 3 days," Audrey said. "The Anna Gala is on Friday. Preston is announcing the Biogen X acquisition. That's when we strike." At the gala, Galt raised an eyebrow. "That's theatrical." "He humiliated me publicly," Audrey said. "I'm going to return the favor." The Anna Holloway Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the kind of event that made the society pages for weeks. The Temple of Denda was bathed in soft golden light, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and even more expensive desperation. Preston Anna arrived late. He walked in like he owned the place, because in a way he still thought he did. He had Tiffany on his arm, draped in a silver gown, that was sheer enough to be scandalous, but expensive enough to be fashion. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The news of the board meeting hadn't broken publicly yet. The attendees, senators, tech moguls, rival hedge fund managers still thought they were toasting the King of Wall Street. "Smile," Preston hissed to Tiffany as cameras flashed. "Don't look nervous." "Why would I be nervous?" Tiffany asked, beaming vacantly. "Because the sharks are circling," Preston muttered, grabbing a glass of champagne. He worked the room, shaking hands, laughing too loudly. He was trying to project power, but his eyes kept darting to the entrance. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He expected Thorne to announce the firing. He expected security to escort him out. But nothing happened. The board members were there, sipping their drinks, avoiding eye contact with him, but saying nothing. It was psychological warfare. They were letting him sweat. Then at 9 p.m. the music stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the top of the grand staircase. Usually this was the moment Preston would descend to give his keynote speech. He stepped forward, adjusting his tuxedo. But the spotlight wasn't for him. At the top of the stairs stood a woman. She was wearing a blood-red Alexander McQueen gown that hugged every curve with a neckline that was sharp and dangerous. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry, except for a simple pair of diamond studs. It took the room a moment to recognize her. The whispers started as a low hum and grew into a roar. "Is that? No, it can't be. It's Audrey." Audrey Hart descended the stairs. She didn't walk. She glided. Every step was calculated. She looked like a queen returning from exile to execute the usurpers. Preston froze. His glass tilted dangerously in his hand. Tiffany looked at Audrey, then down at her own dress, suddenly realizing she looked like a cheap imitation. Audrey reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight up to Preston. The silence in the room was deafening. "Hello, Preston," she said. Her voice was calm, amplified by the acoustics of the stone temple. "What are you doing here?" Preston hissed, his smile strained for the onlookers. "You weren't invited." "Security. I don't need an invitation," Audrey said, raising her voice slightly so the nearby billionaires could hear. "I'm here representing the new majority stakeholders of Anna Holloway." Preston laughed, but it sounded like a choke. "Majority stakeholders, you have a condo in Jersey and a used Rover. Go home, Audrey. You're embarrassing yourself." Audrey signaled to the AV booth. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which was displaying the Anna Holloway logo, flickered. Suddenly the logo disappeared. In its place, a document appeared. It was a trade confirmation. A massive block purchase of Anna Holloway stock executed 10 minutes ago in the after-hours markets. "While you were drinking champagne," Audrey said, her voice cutting through the room, "Jonathan Galt and I just executed a buy order for 15% of the outstanding float, combined with the proxy votes from the board members who fired you this morning." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Fired Preston's face went purple. "You can't, that's so." "We now control the board," Audrey finished. "And as of 8 a.m. tomorrow, we are initiating a forensic audit of the Bio-Gen X deal." "You're bluffing!" Preston screamed, losing his composure entirely. "You don't have the money. Galt is a dinosaur." "Play the tape," Audrey said into her lapel mic. The screen changed again. It wasn't a document this time. It was a waveform audio file. Preston's voice boomed through the museum speakers clear as day. "Tank the stock. Leak the trial failure rumors to TMZ. We buy in at $12, then announce the success. It's an easy billion, Thorne. Who cares if it's illegal? Who's going to catch us? My wife. She's too busy knitting." The room erupted. Phones were out recording everything. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a live execution. Preston looked around. He saw the disgust on the faces of his peers. He saw the fear in Tiffany's eyes as she backed away from him. He saw the end. "You," Preston pointed a shaking finger at Audrey. "You ruined me." "No, Preston," Audrey said, stepping closer until she was inches from his face. She smelled of rain and victory. "You ruined yourself. I just kept the receipts." She turned to the crowd, addressing the stunned room. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bar is open, but I'd advise selling your Anna stock. Tonight." She walked away. She didn't look back. Preston stood alone in the center of the room, the spotlight harsh and unforgiving as his empire crumbled in real time. The Monday morning following the gala wasn't a business day. It was an autopsy. The markets opened at 9:30 a.m., but Anna Holloway was already dead on the table by 8 o'clock. The pre-market trading was a bloodbath. The stock, which had closed Friday at a robust $142 a share, opened at $38 and was in freefall. The ticker symbol was flashing red so fast it looked like a strobe light on the Bloomberg terminals. Audrey stood in the lobby of the skyscraper at 7 o'clock a.m. She wasn't alone. A convoy of black SUVs was parked at the curb lights, flashing blue and red against the grey morning drizzle. The FBI had arrived. Audrey watched from the corner near the security desk as agents in windbreakers, emblazoned with federal agents, swarmed the elevators. They weren't running, but they moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. They carried empty cardboard boxes, hundreds of them. Upstairs on the 40th floor, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. Traders were shouting into phones, trying to offload positions that nobody wanted to buy. Secretaries were crying. A junior analyst was vomiting in a wastebasket near the water cooler. Preston Anna was in his office, the glass fortress he had built to intimidate subordinates. He wasn't shouting. He was sitting in his Eames chair, staring blankly at the wall, a half-packed duffel bag on his desk. He thought he had time to run. He thought he could make it to the private airfield in Teterboro before the indictment dropped. He was wrong. The double doors burst open. 2 agents stepped in, followed by a U.S. Marshal. "Preston Anna," the lead agent barked. Preston stood up, adjusting his tie with a trembling hand. "This is a misunderstanding. Call my lawyer Beryl Penn. He'll explain the—" "Turn around," the agent said, unclipping a pair of steel handcuffs. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit market manipulation." Preston looked past the agents, through the glass walls of his office. He saw his employees, the people he had bullied, underpaid and terrified for a decade, standing still. They weren't working anymore. They were watching, and standing right behind the wall of agents watching him with an expression of cool, detached interest was Audrey. Preston's eyes locked onto hers. His face, usually flushed with arrogance, was ashen. "Audrey," he mouthed. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Goodbye." As they marched him out, parading him past the trading floor in cuffs, a hush fell over the room. The Titan of Wall Street was just a man in a wrinkled suit. The aftermath. By Wednesday, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by the grim reality of the mess Audrey and Galt had purchased. They had seized control of the board, yes. They owned the majority shares, yes. But they now owned a company that was radioactive. Audrey sat in the main conference room, now serving as the war room. The table was covered in takeout containers and legal briefs. Jonathan Galt was pacing the length of the room, looking like a caged tiger. "It's worse than we thought," Galt growled, throwing a balance sheet onto the table. "The clients are fleeing. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar just pulled their entire portfolio. That's $4 billion in assets under management gone in an hour. We're bleeding out, Audrey." Audrey rubbed her temples. She hadn't slept in 72 hours. "We knew there would be attrition, Jonathan. We prepared for a 30% drop. "We're at 65%, Galt shouted. "And the lawsuits we've been served with 3 class action suits since breakfast. This isn't a takeover, it's a suicide pact." "We settle the suits," Audrey said, her voice steady, despite the panic rising in her chest. "We liquidate the yacht, the Hamptons estate, and the private jet fleet Preston bought with company funds. That covers the immediate liquidity crunch. And the reputation," Galt stopped pacing. "The name Anna is poison. Nobody will trust us with a piggy bank, let alone a pension fund." "That's why we rebrand," Audrey said. "We pivot. We're not Anna Holloway anymore. We're going to be transparent. Radical transparency. We open the books. We show the algorithm. Show the algorithm." Galt looked at her like she was insane. "That's the secret sauce, Audrey. You don't give away the recipe." "The recipe is tainted," she countered. "We have to prove we aren't rigging the game anymore. It's the only way to stop the bleeding." Before Galt could argue, the door swung open. It was Ethan Caldwell. Ethan looked terrified. For a man who had spent 20 years living off the grid, hiding from creditors, and the IRS fear was a familiar state. But this was different. This wasn't paranoia. It was dread. "We have a problem," Ethan said. His voice cracked. "We have 1,000 problems, Ethan," Galt snapped. "Pick a number." "No," Ethan said, walking to the head of the table and plugging his laptop into the projector. "Those are money problems. This is an extinction event." On the screen, a command line interface appeared. Rows of red code were scrolling downwards, counting down. "System purge initiated. T-minus 36,0000. "What is that?" Audrey asked, standing up. "It's a dead man's switch," Ethan said grimly. "I found it buried in the kernel of the main trading server." Preston was paranoid. He set up a logic bomb. It's tied to his biometric login. If his retina scan isn't detected by the system for 7 consecutive days, it executes. Galt finished, his face paling. "What does it do?" "It's a scorched earth protocol," Ethan explained, typing furiously to bring up the code structure. "It doesn't just shut us down. It recursively overwrites every hard drive in the data center. Zeros out the databases. It deletes the client ledgers, the transaction, histories, the tax records, the backups, everything." Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. If that happens, Ethan said, "we don't know whose money is whose. We lose billions in client data. The pension funds for the teachers' union gone. The firefighters' endowment gone. We won't just be broke. We'll be responsible for wiping out the savings of 500,000 innocent people. It's not just theft. It's digital arson." "Can you stop it?" Galt demanded. "I've been trying for 6 hours," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's encrypted with AES 256. It needs a passphrase. Without it brute forcing, the code would take 100 years. We have 36 hours. The room fell silent. The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. "He's doing this from a jail cell," Audrey whispered. "He knew he was going down, so he decided to take everyone with him. We have to get the code," Galt said. "We need to talk to him." "He won't give it to you," Ethan said. "He hates you both. He'd rather watch the company burn." Audrey stared at the red countdown. 35, 59, 12. "He won't give it to us," Audrey said, her eyes narrowing. "But he might trade it." "Trade for what?" Galt asked. "We have nothing to offer. He's looking at 20 years. "I know him," Audrey said, grabbing her coat. "Preston doesn't care about money anymore. He doesn't even care about freedom. He cares about one thing: the story." The Cage. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of concrete and misery. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air. Audrey sat in the visitation room. It was a sterile box divided by a thick pane of plexiglass. She kept her hands folded on the metal table, watching the door on the other side. When the guard brought Preston in, Audrey barely recognized him. It had only been 5 days, but the transformation was shocking. Without his tailored suits, his spray tan, and his carefully coiffed hair, Preston looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a middle-aged man who had flown too close to the sun. He wore a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He sat down slowly. He picked up the phone receiver. He didn't smile. "Come to gloat." Preston's voice was tinny through the receiver. "Or did you just want to see me in orange? Does it match the decor of your new office?" Audrey picked up her receiver. "I know about the logic bomb, Preston." Preston's eyes flickered. A spark of life returned to them, a spark of malice. "Ah, found it, did you? I was wondering how long it would take your hacker friend to dig that up." "It's going to wipe the pension funds," Audrey said calmly. "Teachers' pensions, firefighters, people who never hurt you, people who trusted you." Preston leaned back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Collateral damage, Audrey. That's the business. If I can't have the company, why should you? Why should Galt you stole my life? I'm just balancing the ledger." "You're destroying your own legacy," Audrey said. "My legacy is over." Preston snapped his voice, rising. "I'm a felon. I'm the laughing stock of the Financial Times. I have nothing left to protect." "That's where you're wrong," Audrey said. She leaned in closer to the glass. "You have your name." Preston scoffed. "My name is Mud." "Right now, yes," Audrey admitted. "But names can be rehabilitated. History can be rewritten. If you let that bomb go off, you will be remembered as a monster, a financial terrorist. You will die in this prison, despised by everyone." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "But," she continued, "if you give me the code, I can give you a narrative." Preston narrowed his eyes. "What kind of narrative?" "I'm rebranding the firm. But we're launching a foundation, the Anna Initiative for Financial Ethics. We will fund scholarships. We will fund research into market transparency. And we will say that you founded it." Preston blinked. "Me." "We'll spin it?" Audrey lied smoothly. She was improvising, painting a picture she knew he desperately wanted to see. "We'll release a statement saying that during your incarceration you had a change of heart, that you wanted to dedicate your remaining assets to ensuring no one makes the same mistakes you did. You won't be the villain anymore, Preston. You'll be the cautionary tale, the fallen king seeking redemption. You'll write op-eds from your cell. You'll be relevant." The word hung in the air. Relevant. It was the only drug Preston was truly addicted to. The fear of being forgotten, of being a nobody, terrified him more than the prison bars. He looked at Audrey. He searched her face for deceit, but she was a mirror reflecting only his own desperate need for validation. "You'd keep my name," he whispered. "On the building." "On the foundation," she corrected. "But the foundation will be the soul of the company." Preston looked down at his hands, hands that used to sign billion-dollar checks now empty. He looked at the clock on the wall. 30 hours left, he mumbled. "Give me the code, Preston. Save your name." He closed his eyes. For a long moment, Audrey thought he would refuse. She thought his spite would outweigh his ego. Then he opened his eyes. They were wet. "It's not a word," he said softly. "It's a date." Audrey pulled a pen from her pocket, hovering it over her notepad. "What date?" "June 12th, 2012. Audrey froze. The pen hovered over the paper. her breath caught in her throat. June 12th, 2012. It wasn't the day the company went public. It wasn't the day he made his first $1 million. It was the day they had signed the lease on their first tiny office in Queens. It was the day they had sat on the floor, eating cold pizza, drinking cheap champagne out of paper cups, dreaming about the future. It was the last day. They were truly happy. Preston looked at her, and for the first time in years, the mask dropped completely. "I never changed the password," he said, his voice cracking. "I kept it, all these years. I thought it brought me luck." A wave of complex emotion hit Audrey, pity, sadness, and a strange dull ache for the boy he used to be. The boy she had loved before. The money ate him alive. "Thank you," she whispered. She stood up. "Audrey," Preston called out as she turned to leave. She paused, hand on the heavy steel door. "You were the only real thing in my life," he said, "and I traded you for a stock price. I know that now." Audrey didn't turn back. She couldn't. If she looked at him now, she might cry, and she couldn't afford to cry. She had a company to save. "Goodbye, Preston," she said. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in his concrete box. The diffusal Audrey practically ran out of the prison. She dialed Ethan from the back of the cab. "I have it," she said. "Ready?" "I'm at the terminal." Ethan's voice was tight. "Read it to me." 06-1, 2-2, 0-1, 2. There was a silence on the other end, the sound of keys clacking furiously, then a pause that felt like a lifetime. "Ethan," Audrey asked, gripping the phone. It paused, Ethan said. "Wait, the prompt is changing." Audrey held her breath. "Access granted." Ethan breathed out. "Command aborted. The purge is stopped. We're in Audrey. We have full administrative control. The data is safe." Audrey let out a long, shuddering exhale. She slumped against the leather seat of the taxi. The adrenaline that had been holding her upright for days suddenly evaporated, leaving her exhausted but weightless. They had done it. They had saved the money, the pensions, the future. But as the cab merged onto the Brooklyn Bridge, showing the glittering skyline of Manhattan, Audrey realized something. She hadn't just saved the company from Preston. She had finally, truly broken free of him. The code was the final tether. He had used their memory as a weapon to destroy. She had used it to save. She looked out at the city lights. They didn't look like gold coins anymore. They looked like lights, just lights. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The inputting of the code, 06122012, was anticlimactic. There were no fireworks, no sirens, just a simple dialogue box on the main server screen that turned from a flashing red "System purge imminent" to a cool, steady green "aborted." Ethan slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for 2 days. "We're good. The data is safe. The clients didn't feel a thing." Audrey didn't slump. She stood straighter. She walked to the window of the server room, looking out at the chaotic floor of the New York Stock Exchange across the street. She had saved the company, but she knew the hardest work was just beginning. Saving a building from burning down is one thing. Scrubbing the soot off the walls and making people want to live inside it, again, is another. 3 months later, the sentencing of Preston Anna was the social event of the season, though not the kind he had always envisioned. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan was packed. Sketch artists were furiously scribbling, trying to capture the hollowness in Preston's cheeks. Audrey sat in the back row, wearing a slate-grey suit, her face obscured by oversized sunglasses. She wasn't there to gloat. She was there to witness the closing of a chapter. When the judge read the sentence, 15 years in a minimum security federal facility restitution of $120 million and a lifetime ban from trading securities, Preston didn't cry. He just nodded, his eyes vacant. As the bailiffs led him away, he paused. He scanned the gallery. His eyes locked onto Audrey's. For a fleeting second, there was a flash of something anger, regret. But then his gaze shifted to the press cameras, and he straightened his tie, remembering the script Audrey had written for him. He was the repentant founder. He had a role to play. Outside the courthouse, the media swarm was intense. Mrs. Hart. A reporter from CNBC shoved a microphone in her face. How do you feel seeing your ex-husband go to prison? Is it true you're keeping his name on the new charitable foundation? Audrey stopped. The cameras clicked furiously. Preston made mistakes, she said, her voice steady and practiced. Serious criminal mistakes. But the Anna Initiative will ensure that his knowledge is used to teach ethics, not circumvent them. We believe in redemption, just not in recidivism. She got into her waiting car. As the door closed, she saw a familiar face on the sidewalk. It was Tiffany. The young brand consultant looked disheveled. She was holding a stack of flyers for a yoga retreat she was trying to launch in Tulum. She saw Audrey in the plush back seat of the town car. Tiffany's mouth opened to say something, perhaps to shout an insult or beg for a connection, but the car pulled away before she could make a sound. The silence was the ultimate revenge. The war room. Back at the office, the atmosphere was tense. The rebranding was underway, but the culture clash between Audrey's vision and Jonathan Galt's instincts was reaching a boiling point. They were in the main conference room, the table strewn with prospectuses for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company called Arden Health. "Gut it," Galt said, tossing a file onto the mahogany. He was chewing on a toothpick, looking every bit the corporate raider he was in the 80s. "Arden is sitting on prime real estate in Boston. The R&D division is bleeding cash. We buy it, sell the land, fire the scientists, and we walk away with a 200% return in 6 months. We are not stripping it," Audrey said calmly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to anymore. "Audrey, look at the numbers," Galt growled. "This is a charity ward, not a business. The R&D division is bleeding cash because they are in Phase 3 trials for a non-opioid painkiller." Audrey counted, tapping the glass screen of her tablet. "If it passes FDA approval, which my analysts say is 80% likely, the stock triples. Not in 6 months, but in 2 years. And we actually help people. And if it fails, then we pivot, but we don't kill it before it has a chance to breathe." Audrey stood up, walking to the head of the table. "This is why the board backed me, Jonathan. Because Anna Holloway was short-term greed. Hart and Galt is long-term value. Are you with me, or do you want to cash out your shares and go back to Wyoming?" The room went silent. The junior analysts held their breath. Nobody spoke to Jonathan Galt like that. Galt stared at her. His blue eyes narrowed, assessing her like a poker hand. He looked for fear. He found none. He looked for hesitation. He found only steel. Slowly a grin spread across his weathered face. He chuckled a dry, raspy sound. "You're a stubborn woman, Audrey." "I learned from the worst," she replied. "Fine." Galt waved his hand. "We keep the scientists. But if the FDA denies the drug, I'm turning that lab into a condo complex myself. Deal." The society lunch. A week later, Audrey found herself at Le Coucou for a mandatory networking lunch. She was there to woo a potential investor, but as she walked through the dining room, she felt the eyes on her. At a corner table sat Clarissa Vanderbilt, and the inner circle, the group of wives who had frozen Audrey out, the moment Preston filed for divorce. They were the ones who had laughed when she was left with the rover. Audrey paused. She could walk past them. She could ignore them. Instead, she walked right up to their table. Clarissa froze a forkful of endive salad, hovering halfway to her mouth. "Audrey, oh my God, we were just talking about you." "I bet you were," Audrey said, smiling warmly. It was the smile of a predator who has already eaten and is merely observing the prey. "You look tired," Clarissa said, trying to regain her footing with a backhanded compliment. "Running a company must be so draining. Preston always said it was a man's game." "Preston is currently making license plates," Audrey said sweetly. "So I'm not sure his opinion on the game is relevant anymore." The other women stifled gasps. "Actually, Clarissa, I'm glad I ran into you," Audrey continued, pulling a business card from her purse. It was heavy stock, embossed with gold. "I was reviewing our client list. I noticed your husband's family trust is managed by our firm." Clarissa paled. "Yes, for years. Well, we're restructuring our client base. We've decided to institute a minimum liquidity requirement and a moral conduct clause. I'm afraid we'll be off-boarding the Vanderbilt Trust effective Monday. You'll receive the paperwork." You can't fire us as clients," Clarissa sputtered. "Do you know who we are?" "I know exactly who you are," Audrey said, leaning in. "You're the people who bet against me, and the house always wins." She dropped the card on the table right into Clarissa's salad. "Enjoy your lunch, ladies." Audrey walked away. She didn't feel the rush of adrenaline she expected. She felt peace. She realized she didn't care about their acceptance. She didn't want a seat at their table. She had built her own table. The final piece. 6 months after the takeover, the transition was complete. The Anna name had been scrubbed from the building. The lobby now bore the name Hart and Galt Capital in brushed bronze. It was late on a Friday. Most of the staff had gone home. The city lights were twinkling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Audrey's corner office, the office that used to be Preston's. It looked different now. The cold, sterile aesthetic was gone. Audrey had brought in warmth bookshelves, filled with actual books, a comfortable velvet sofa, and art that she actually liked, not just investment pieces. She was packing up her bag when Galt knocked on the doorframe. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yes. I'm flying to Boston in the morning to meet the Arden Health team." Galt walked in. He was holding a small wrapped box. "Before you go, a peace offering for the argument last week." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "You don't do gifts, Jonathan?" "I don't. But I found something in the storage unit downstairs. It seemed appropriate." Audrey took the box. It was heavy. She undid the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside sat the Rolodex. But it wasn't the dusty, cracked plastic relic she had carried out in a shopping bag that rainy night. Galt had had it restored. The cheap grey plastic had been sanded down and painted a deep matte black, but the cracks, the hairline fractures where the base had been broken and taped together, had been filled with a vein of solid gold. It was kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, treating the breakage and repair as part of the history of an object rather than something to disguise. The flaws were now the most beautiful part of it. Audrey ran her finger over the gold vein. "Ethan told me about the tape," Galt said, looking at his boots. "About how you saved it. Preston thought this thing was trash. He threw it away. You saw the value in the broken pieces." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You did the same thing with this company, Audrey. You took a broken, corrupt mess and filled the cracks with gold. You didn't hide the scars. You made them the strongest part of the structure." Audrey felt a lump in her throat. For all the battles, all the board meetings, and all the stress, this was the first time she felt truly seen. "Thank you, Jonathan," she whispered. "Don't get soft on me, Hart." He grunted, turning to leave. "We have a merger to discuss on Monday, and I still think we should sell the Boston land." "Not happening," she called out. "We'll see," he shouted back from the hallway, but she could hear the smile in his voice. Audrey sat alone in the office. She placed the Rolodex on her desk, right next to her nameplate. Audrey Hart, CEO. She picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts. She didn't need the Rolodex anymore, not really. The names inside were from a past life, but she kept it as a reminder that when they laugh, you listen. When they leave, you learn. And when they break you, you don't just put yourself back together. You rebuild yourself with gold. She grabbed her coat and walked out of the office. The elevator dinged, opening to the lobby. She walked out onto Greenwich Street. It was raining again, just like that night. But this time, Audrey didn't hail a cab. Her driver opened the door of the company car. "Home, Ms. Hart." Audrey looked up at the penthouse balcony where she had once stood, crying. She looked at the ghost of the woman she used to be. She blew her a kiss. "No," Audrey said, settling into the warm leather seat. "Take me to the airport. I have $1 billion deal to close." The car pulled away, disappearing into the city of lights, leaving the ghosts of the past in the dark where they belonged. And that is how Audrey Hart went from a discard pile to the head of the table. It's a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting the loudest, it's the one who's listening. Preston Anna learned the hard way that when you strip someone of everything, you leave them with nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and high-stakes corporate warfare, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Did you think Audrey let Preston off too easy with the legacy deal? Or was it the perfect strategic move? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep your friends close and your receipts closer.